Welcome. I'm Frances Reid, Programme Director for the World Ovarian Cancer Coalition. This section of our Best Possible Care event is focused on access to clinical trials. Last November, we took time to explore the lack of clinical trials in lower income countries in our Data Diversity event, recordings of which are available on our website and on our YouTube channel. Do take a look if you haven't yet come across them. Our event today, though, is looking at how we can improve participation in trials where they already exist and why that is so important. To begin, though, I thought it would be useful to recap some of the results relating to clinical trials from our Every Woman study undertaken in 2018 and published in the International Journal of Gynecological Cancer last year. 1,531 women from 44 countries took part in the study, mainly from higher income countries. Just 2.7% of women said they were not at all interested in clinical trials, leaving the vast majority open to the possibility of taking part. Only 1 in 4 women had a doctor initiate a conversation with them about trials. 1 in 10 had to initiate a conversation themselves. And for 2/3 of women, there was no mention of clinical trials whatsoever. As with all our findings in the Every Woman study, the variation by country was very wide, as shown in this graph. Women in Japan were much less likely to be asked about clinical trials than women in Germany. And overall, in our study, just 12.4%, that's 1 in 8 women, had taken part in a clinical trial. So, ACTO, the Alliance Against Ovarian Cancer. It's a network of patient associations from Italy, based in Rome and Milan with 6 regional affiliates. They're members of our coalition and our charter champions. And they were formed to create a strong alliance between patients, researchers and doctors to fight ovarian cancer. ACTO have been particularly interested in the topic that we're discussing today, and have recently undertaken an observational multi-centre study across 25 centres of excellence in Italy, in conjunction with the Mario Negri Gyne-Oncology Group, otherwise known as MANGO, and MITO, the multi-centre Italian Trials in Ovarian Cancer Group. The name of their study is Research in ACTO, and data was gathered from March 2019 until September 2020. Women attending clinics for follow-up or for their first treatments filled out a questionnaire exploring their knowledge about clinical research and in particular randomized controlled trials, and whether or not they had any discussion with their doctors about the subject. Nicoletta Cerana is the president of ACTO, and she takes us through the findings which have just been released.
So thank you for having given to me the opportunity to present the results of this research. The respondent patient participating to the research were 359. Among these 359 questionnaires received from all over Italy, 11 were excluded. So we worked on 348 questionnaires. Next one, please. About the characteristic of the 348 responders, we had women with an age from 55 to 65, with a level of education quite balanced between less and high level education. This more than 70% of people were unpaid because retired or housewife or other, and just a small amount of responders, 6.2%, were occupied in the health sector. Quite balanced also the year of diagnosis. The 56.3% had the diagnosis between 2019 and 2020, and the 43.7% before 2018. What is interesting to see in this chart is the percentage of responders who in the past had never been invited to take part in a clinical trial. They were the 88.4%. And the 73.9% of the respondents were never invited in the past 3 months. And this is a result quite consistent with the result we had in the Every Woman study of 2018. You can go to the next one. This is the, yes. About the people that participated in the last 3 months to a clinical trial, the main reason to participate were trust in the doctor, confidence in clinical trial, the fact to being able to have new therapies, best treatment, more assistance, and also more information or more clear information. Among the people who have never been invited to take part in a clinical trial, the main reason we tried to select were personal reason, trust in the doctor, insufficient information, indirect cost, a little time to decide. But about reasons and obstacles for participating, they must be studied in a more deeply way, because we really do not know why people are not invited by doctors, and we don't know really why people do not attend to clinical trial. If you go to the next one, we now are in front of the knowledge about clinical trial. And the 59.1% of responders read in the internet or in a newspaper about clinical trial, or heard in television, or discussed it with their doctor. So the 59.1% is a quite good level of knowledge. But the trouble is that 34.9% of responders, just the 34.9% of responders knew the meaning of the word randomization, referring to the investigation of a new drug or a medical procedure. This means that, if you put the next number, please. This means that 65.1% of women responders didn't know how the process of a clinical trial, do know the process. And if we go to the attitude, to the next chart, we can understand better what is the situation in Italy. The attitudes towards clinical trial were assessed on six aspects. The first one is the trust in clinical trial. The 91.5% of the responders said they trust in clinical trial because they are convinced that the clinical trial gives benefits to patient and society. But the 54.1% of responders doesn't know the risk and the benefit connected to a clinical study. So they do not know if the risks in participating overweigh the potential benefit. And what is interesting to see is that more than 1/3 of responders do not know if they are in favor of participating or suggest the participation to a relative or a friend. And this explains better the 90.3% of responders who delegates to the doctor the decision to participate to a clinical trial, because the doctor in Italy plays an important and crucial role in the decision to participate. The 77.9% of people thinks that all clinical results, positive or negative, must be public. About the involvement of patient association, the 71.2% of responders are convinced that the association must be actively involved in clinical trial. And about the role, the 20.9% think that the patient association can improve information given to patient about trial and can facilitate the participation to trial. Another about 20% thinks that a patient association can make suggestions for conducting trials of real benefit to patient, and few of responders thinks that the patient association can communicate results or be the voice of patient during this discussion and the analysis of results. From these few results that you can see recap in this infographic, we can point out two key findings. The first one in the next chart, please, is the lack of culture among physicians about proposing clinical trial, because the more than the 80% of responders of our sample had no experience in clinical trial participation in the past. So commenting the data, our scientific committee said that there is a need to improve and implement the culture of shared decision-making in oncology setting, where patients are faced with complicated treatment decisions that require them to weigh efficacy and safety, quality of life, and costs. So it needs time and effort from physician and patient to communicate each other. And here there is a lot to do for an association like ours. The other key findings, more important, is the lack of empowerment among ovarian cancer patients. The majority of patients of our sample, the Italian one, 90.3%, depend on physician to take a decision. And this result indicates a very high level of indecision, probably due to two facts. First of all, an insufficient knowledge of the risk and benefit associated. And secondly, the perception of uncertainty about the results of experimental treatments associated with fear of death. In conclusion, there is a lot to do for a patient association in order to improve patient knowledge on clinical trial, in order to raise the attention on patient health literacy and empowerment, and to advocate a research based on patient needs, helping to develop a good quality clinical trial.
Nicoletta Cerana, president of ACTO, with those quite shocking results. Little knowledge about trials and little interaction between patients and doctors on the subject as well. So plenty for clinicians and patient organisations to address. Given this lack of knowledge, it's not surprising then that so few women are involved. Our next contributor, Professor Brendan Buckley, is Chief Medical Officer of TECRO and on the board of trustees for Breakthrough Cancer Research in Ireland, another of our members. He is very clear why women should be involved in trials.
Well, I believe that the first question that should be asked of patients with cancer on diagnosis should be, would they do better on a clinical trial than an existing standard of care? And the reason for that is that the cutting edge treatments are first encountered in clinical trials. But not only that, in many places, treatments may have been approved by the regulator, but are not yet reimbursed or provided by insurers or by a health service. and they form part of best standard of care. So patients in trials always are at least on what is recognized internationally as best care. And then on top of that, they may have a placebo or they may have a new treatment. And it's been shown in many studies that patients who are in trials have better outcomes, irrespective of whether the new drug works or not, but they have better outcomes than those who are just in routine care.
So if trials are so important for patients with cancer, why are there not more people recruited into them?
Well, the practical challenges are that, firstly, there may just not be a trial that I'm running or that colleagues are running in my hospital. So I need to know where trials are available, within the region that's reasonably accessed by travel. So, I live in Ireland, so I need to know whether trial centres for a particular trial are open elsewhere in the country. So just that direct access to a trial is often not that easy, and it requires significant effort to find out what's going on, and then to refer patients to trials as well. And as a clinician, I was always very busy. There were always people outside my consulting rooms wondering, why is he taking so long with the one that's in with him? And, the pressure of getting through the workload is significant. And then on top of that, if you have to go exploring where you can refer patients to trials, that's an additional task. And with the best will in the world, I confess that I skipped that many times because I just didn't have time or opportunity.
And the situation is only getting more complex as ovarian cancer moves from being seen as a homogeneous disease with a one-size-fits-all approach to treatment.
Treatments are being developed which target very specific mechanisms which may or may not be present in an individual cancer. And for that reason, the treatments are, they require probably fewer people in the trial, but people are also much harder to recruit. So again, let's take ovarian cancer. There may, a center dealing with that may see a couple of hundred people a year with new diagnoses of that condition. But if one is looking for a very specific molecular subtype, there may only be 2 or 3 people a year in that same center with this specific tumor. So it means that trials have to be spread over many more centers, over many more countries, to find the specific markers and the specific mechanisms that a new targeted treatment, personalized for that patient and tumor, can address.
So there are difficult times ahead with more trial centres, but fewer patients in each trial at each centre. This has coincided pretty much with the arrival of COVID-19. And whilst it has wreaked havoc in terms of cancer diagnosis and treatment and care, it also has offered some new ways of working that are making researchers think how they run trials, making it easier for the patient to comply with the protocol, reducing the number of hospital visits, and providing real-time data captured electronically. Brendan is very positive about these changes in care for patients, but he takes it further and says there is room for even more involvement from patients and patient organisations.
You'll excuse me if this is a little bit of a hobby horse of mine, but traditionally patients haven't really been treated as stakeholders in the trial. And that's a very paradoxical thing because, of course, they're the people who really have the biggest stake in the outcome. And that's beginning to change. And what I think, I like to try to work towards a situation in which patients in trials are seen as having a big contribution to play as individuals in the trial. And that means they really need to understand what's going on. And I like to think of patients almost as being co-investigators in the course of the way the trial is run. We often are slaves to a traditional way of measuring an outcome. And while these traditional ways are very important, there are other things that patient organizations can draw to the attention of investigators and of those who are designing protocols and say, these are important to us. And things like quality of life questionnaires have been used for many years. But I think that again can be expanded. And for many conditions, things that are important to patients, are often missed out from trials, and they need to be included. There is a trade-off. Patient organizations can really help with recruitment of trials. So you have considerable reach through a very large number of people, and you're also trusted. So you're not some kind of giant corporation that people are, feel a bit equivocal about. You're clearly working only for one thing, and that's in the interests of people with this condition. So you have a great opportunity to accelerate trials by helping recruitment, but there is a quid pro quo that you're entitled to ask for, and that is that views on how protocols are designed, how invasive procedures are. You may actually be happy to have procedures that are more invasive even, because the pharma company or the ethics committee may just really not know what they're talking about. You may be able to accept things in the interests of success that an ethics committee might consider, or a sponsor pharma company might consider to be a bit too much. So I think you have a great contribution on both sides of that. And the way that that can percolate through the whole design of a trial can be really very valuable.
Professor Brendan Buckley, highlighting the current opportunities to make progress in clinical trials in terms of how they're run and developed, and it sounds promising. But we need pipelines of accessible clinical trials. Trials should be a regular topic at multidisciplinary team meetings. We need to ensure doctors know about trials, not just in their own centre, and crucially, have the time to talk with their patients about them. And we need to ensure that patients and patient organisations are closely involved in development of trials, and that patient organisations can play a really central role in letting women know what might be available for them. One of our patient organisation charter champions, the Clearity Foundation in the United States, help women to find appropriate clinical trials through a programme on their website that was first developed in 2012. Dr. Deb Sikowski is their scientific director.
The Clarity Foundation was founded back in 2008 with the mission of providing hope to women with ovarian cancer and their families. And we do this by providing individualized support with regard to their treatment decision-making, whether they be standard of care or in clinical trials, as well as by providing psychosocial support and guiding them on the emotional ups and downs of this journey with ovarian cancer. As you can imagine, from the beginning, we needed to develop infrastructure to help women get access to the tumor profiling that they needed to identify which drugs best matched that tumor profile so that they had the best options available to them for treatment. And in that process, we've built an interactive tumor profiling report that helps them understand the results of that testing, and that actually links directly to clinical trials for the drugs that match their tumor. So in addition to having linked trials directly to this tumor profiling report, we also have a standalone clinical trial finder that includes all of the trials in the United States for which ovarian cancer patients will be eligible. And it is a very user-friendly interface, asking questions about their clinical situation, including the prior therapies they've had, the number of them, the platinum response that they had to prior therapies, as well as their histology and whether they have measurable disease, and information about their tumor profile. The information that they fill out allows us to hone in on the trials for which they're most likely to be eligible. They get a list of those trials, and those trials are actually prioritizable based on the location, as well as based on the results from the clinical trials, because we add results for every drug that's already been tested that's involved in that particular clinical trial directly to the trial, as well as any results that have already been published for the trial itself. And those results then can be captured and saved to bring to the oncologist so that they can have a discussion about the options that are available to them. We obviously want to reach more patients, and we want this tool in some way to be used worldwide. So there may very well be ways of adapting it with the right partners. Once it is built, it takes a full-time person to annotate the stream of new trials that comes in electronically, and also to track the results that are published in the literature for any of the drugs that are being used in the clinical trials. We already know we've had the approval of PARP inhibitors that are directed toward patients based on their tumor biomarker, which happens to be a BRCA status or a homologous recombination deficiency. This wave of personalization and tumor biomarker-directed therapies is likely to continue as we gain more knowledge about how best to match drugs with the individual patient, and therefore a mechanism for identifying the appropriate drugs that are approved using a tumor profile, as well as drugs that are in clinical trials, is absolutely necessary. And we go beyond that, not just the tumor biomarker-directed drugs, but even drugs that are in phase 3 trials today and phase 2 trials today are really much more active in, we think, than some of the standard of care options. So it really makes sense to search for these trials as early as possible for every woman that has ovarian cancer, because there may be more benefit available with those drugs than with the standard options.
Fantastic work of our charter champion, the Clearity Foundation. That was their scientific director, Dr. Deb Sikowski. And thank you to all our guests for their contribution today. So all in all, much to think about and much to be done. But I want to leave you with a statistic that stuck in my mind when I chatted about this event with Nicoletta Cerana. She highlighted that a recent study of 8 European countries showed that 55% of the Italian population were deemed to have insufficient or no health literacy, and that this contributed on their reliance on doctors to determine what happens to them and not to ask about alternatives. So while we think about important programs going forward, we really mustn't forget the very basics of talking to women about trials, about what that means, about what they involve, what the different terms mean, and what the benefits might be, the real basics. Our event is about to come to an end. So now I invite you to join our Chief Executive, Clara McKay, for her closing remarks. And you can do that by clicking on the next session button. Thank you.